Good afternoon, and welcome to K2's Road to Excellence with Excel Series Part 10 and our good friend TaxCycle. This is Alan Salmon, and I'm pleased to welcome you to our first webinar in June, with 2 more to go. A little bit of housekeeping before we get started. You are all muted except for the presenters for obvious reasons. In terms of notes, you're welcome to take notes. However, remember that 10 days from now, you're going to receive the recording of this webinar, my teaching notes, and they're extensive, my teaching files, and the answers to all of your questions. And speaking of questions, my good friend Marilyn Benninger is backing me up as usual today. She is your go-to person for technical issues and for questions. And for those of you that haven't been with us before, you ask any and all your questions through the chat window. There's usually not time to answer questions in the 25 minutes or so that we have available. So with your recording package, you will get all of the questions and all of the answers. And you will also get your CPD certificate. 5 times today, Marilyn is going to stop Elizabeth or myself and put up a polling question. For those of you that are new, that is a multiple choice question with 3, 4, or 5 possible answers. You don't need to get the answer right, but you do need to answer one of the options because that time stamps your file, and we know that you are listening at that point in time. If you get recorded as being present for 75% of the polling questions, you will get 1 CPD hour verifiable. If not, it'll be a non-CPD file. So today is one of my favorite topics, pivot tables. So Marilyn, let's find out where the group is at in regards to working with pivot tables. Please put up the first poll.
Absolutely, Alan. So folks, you'll see your screen should have turned blue, and we're asking you the first poll question. Pretty simple. Have you ever used pivot tables? Your choices are no. Maybe you tried and you've given up. That would be the book that I'm in. You can try them. You struggle sometimes, or you're an ace. So what we do is we wait for at least 90%, and we're just about there. Good for you folks this morning. 90%. I'm going to close the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. And now I'm going to share the results with you, Alan.
$41. Well, we got more aces this time, Marilyn, than we usually get, but I've got some work to do with the other 76%. So let's do it. And I've got the wrong file up here. Just give me a second. Here we go. So let's start with what a pivot table is in a definition. What you're seeing in front of you is a very basic, we call it a table, columns and rows. Not too many rows. Let's see, 109. Now, if you look at this, it would not be difficult for me to do a sort on 1-inch galvanized pipe, and I'll get 12 responses because there'll be a sale for each month. And I would then go and do one of 2 options. I would insert a row and I would do a total, or I might do a VLOOKUP. There's a couple of ways I could get those subtotals, all of which involve a lot of work. But take a look now at this same data displayed this way. And you notice 47,360 is my sales of 1-inch galvanized pipe in the year 2012. And what you're looking at, of course, ladies and gentlemen, is a pivot table. So what's another title or word for a pivot table? Nothing more than a summary report. So with that kind of background, let's now move to actually creating a pivot table. So I've got a different data set here. This time I've got 5 columns, and we'll quickly check on how many rows. Oh, a little more. So how do we turn it into a pivot table? Step 1, click anywhere in the data set, and you'll see why in a moment. And then, not too difficult to guess that you would go insert. Now, for those of you on 2010 or 13 and 16, Microsoft added a little thing here called recommended pivot tables. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in the next session. But today we're going to work from the grassroots. So I'm going to click on the first choice, which is I want to create a pivot table. And I get this little box. Now remember that I said click in the data set, and you can now see the reason, because Excel says, I guess you want to create a pivot table from the data that starts in A1 and goes to E431. Yep. Where do you want it? I think that in my career of a huge number of creating pivot tables, I can't recall when I ever created a pivot table in the same sheet. It's always been a new worksheet. Click on OK. Now, we got 2 sets of stuff here. Over here is where the pivot table is going to be displayed. Over here, in here, those are the column numbers or columns from here. And our challenge is, where do we want things to be placed on our summary report? Well, in this case, I want the vendor running down column A. So I merely click on the checkbox that says vendor. Well, that was pretty easy. And you notice when I did that in this 4 quadrants down here, it put it in the row, meaning that I want the data going row by row. So the first time I did this, because it changed from 2003, I said, wow, you mean I just have to click on checkboxes and it'll automatically do it for me? Well, let's try it. Oops. Understand what it did. There's my supplier names, and then it's put the months in there, which is not what I want. I want the months to go across the top. So we'll just uncheck that, and we'll not click on the checkbox, but you see the 4-headed monster there. I'm going to left mouse click, hold it, and drag it down into the columns. Well, that was pretty easy, but there we go. So now we've got the vendors down here, and in this big white space, guess what we want? The summary. So I come down here to amount, and what do I do with that? Drag it down here under the value column. And there you go. There's your first pivot table. Now we'll get into a little more complexities and when I would use the filter quadrant and all of those things, partly in this session and a lot more in the next session. So that wasn't very difficult. Let's try a different one. Now, in this one, I got a bunch of columns. I go over to column N and stand by for the number of rows. Well, I've only got 91,053 rows. And that's pretty big. I've actually built a pivot table with 1 million rows just to see what happens. So here's my question for you. The question is, with this larger data set, it's going to take me a lot longer to create a pivot table? And for you aces, you're going to instantly answer no. So let's prove it to you. I'm going to go to Insert. I'm going to go to Pivot Table. Notice that I've selected in it so it knows that I'm going from A1 to 91,000. I'm going to put it in a new worksheet, and I'm going to click on OK. Notice this time we got a lot of columns from A to N. Do we have to use them all? Absolutely not. So I'm going to select customer name. No, there'll be too many. I'm going to select region, and you notice that we've got Canada at the top and then that. And then I've got a choice between order date and ship date. Let's do ship date in the columns. And let's do sale amount in my values. And there we go. Now it's not pretty because I haven't done any formatting, which is where we're going to go next. But there's 91,000 rows summarized. Amazing. So next, let's look at formatting a pivot table. And I've already got it built here so that we can play with it. And you'll notice that I've selected a cell outside the pivot table. And I want you to notice up here the name of the pivot table. Watch up there when I select any area inside the pivot table. That changed. I no longer see the name, but I see pivot table tools. And that means that Excel has added automatically 2 more tabs that deal with pivot tables, one called Analyze and one called Design. And for the moment, we're going to focus on Design and watch the ribbon change. Because now what we're dealing with is issues in the design of a pivot table. And for those of you that have seen me do a format as table in Excel will recognize that these are styles. So how do I want to format my pivot table? And again, notice that we've got previews. And I can get it pretty dark down here and so on. But, you know, let's deal with that one. Well, that was okay. But over here, we've got banded rows and banded columns. So watch the formatting change when I use banded rows or banded columns. And really that style doesn't show well. So let me get a different style here. There we go. Okay. So there's banded rows and banded columns. Now, I very rarely use banded columns in a pivot table, but I really like banded rows because it sets things apart. Now, the other thing that I can do, of course, is we need to do some formatting. So we just go back to the Home tab and we click on the comma and we get rid of the cents. So notice that that has been formatted as a comma format. Now I could have done the formatting before I created the style, and that is not a good idea. If I do format like I just did with the style already set, Excel maintains that when I change the look and feel of the pivot table, which I will do either in today's session, but probably in the next session. So a tip, when you're creating your pivot table, select your style before you do any formatting. Next, I want to deal with a pivot table trap. Oops. Okay. Now, this is the first data set that I showed you, and I've already done insert, create the pivot table, and so on. And here's the result that I got, or that you will get, with one exception. What it's done there is done a count. And you'll notice the blank cell here. If we go back here to here, you'll notice that I have a blank cell in this row. Now, up until last month, with any version of Excel, if you had a blank row, then the default was set to a count, and we've never been able to figure out why. If you have a blank column, you can't even create the pivot table. Now, for those of you on Office 365, you will not have that problem. And let me prove it to you. So I'm going to create the pivot table with that blank cell there. There we go. And we want product, we want month, and we want sales. So for the last 10 years or so, we wanted this to happen in a pivot table. Why is it happening now for me? Because I'm on Office 365 and Microsoft updates Office 365, once a month for sure. So the June update that came out a couple of weeks ago, they fixed this problem. So let me be clear. If you are not on Office 365 and you create a pivot table with a blank cell, you will get a count. And I will show you how to fix that before I move on. So I've selected all the data and I'm going to right mouse click and I'm going to go down to value field settings. And I'm going to change it to count. So that's what your pivot table is going to look like. Let's do it again. Select it all, right mouse click, value field settings, and I have a choice. I could set it to sum, count, average, max, min, and so on. We're going to set it to sum. So as I say, for those of you that are not on Office 365, you're going to need to do that. Next. Once again, I've got a pivot table here, done, and and it's the one we did before. And notice that I've got months here. Well, that may be okay, but what happens if I want to display this as quarters? I select any of the months and I right mouse click, and notice down here the choice group. And I click on it. Excel gives me a bunch of options, and I can actually group anywhere from seconds to years. And you notice that both months and quarters are highlighted. I'm going to uncheck months. And there we go. So let's do it again. Whoops. Let's do it again. And this time let's display both the months and the quarters. So I'll go back to group. So notice that I've got the quarters up here and I've got the months down here. And you notice there's a minus sign currently in front of all the 4 quarters. If I click on that, it's only displaying Q1. It's not displaying March or January, February, March, and the same thing here. So we've got a great deal of variation in our ability to see the data, and that will be one of the key items 2 weeks from now. Next, let's do another group. Same file. But you notice that when I did the grouping on months, I did them all. But I can create a custom group, which is what I'm going to do now. If you look at column A, I've got beverages and food. And I've got insurance, rent, supplies, and utilities. So I'm going to create 3 groups. And I'm going to select the items by using the control key. So control key click. And click. And then I'm going to right mouse click and again go to group. Now this looks weird because I've got group 1 that includes beverages, and then I've got separate groups for all of the rest, and we'll fix that in a minute. And group 1 doesn't tell me anything, so I'm going to call it products. And there we go. All right, let's take insurance. And by the way, notice that I'm clicking on the row that's got insurance, not the so-called group. And then I'm going to click on rent, supplies, and utility. And I'm going to right mouse click. And I'm going to call this, I don't know, operating costs. Okay. And I'm going to leave payroll as a group. The same thing here. Click on the minus sign, click on the minus sign. So grouping is a huge function and ability in Excel. And speaking of that, let's go here. To here. And notice there's my group. This time I've got food, leaseholds, and payroll expense. Well, there's obviously something missing here that I need. I need a subtotal for each group. So the standard way to do that in a normal deck is to do an insert. I don't have to do that. I go inside the pivot table, select any field, and I go up here to my pivot table tools and I click on design. Now, we focused a while ago on this and this, but notice over here, gee, that's kind of interesting. Subtotals. I click on it, and the default is do not show subtotals. Show subtotals at the bottom of the group. Show subtotals at the top of the group. There we go. And if we do them at the top, we've got that. And the question that I usually get is, why would I put them at the top? I would put them at the top in the case of, let's say, my 91,000 row, where I had 100, 200, 500, 800, or 1,000 items in a particular group. But the normal one is, as you would expect, to do them at the bottom. All right, I have time for one more. So we need to focus here. Again, my standard pivot table and my data. So I'm going to go down to the bottom and do this. Just going to copy that for the sake of speed and put it down there. Now, obviously the pivot table needs to be updated. And the way we update a pivot table, the fastest way is just to right mouse click and go down to refresh. And absolutely nothing changed. Why? Because the pivot table area or range did not change. And I could go in here and it automatically picks it up, and it does it. However, that's way too much work. So my conclusion is something that you need to have engraved under your right or left eyelid. Before you ever create a pivot table, you're going to go here and you're going to go to Format as Table, and you're going to pick a format like that. Now, why? Because if you remember, if a table like this expands, it automatically changes the range. And that means that the pivot table will update automatically when you right mouse click and click on refresh. So my recommendation is always turn this into a table. And on that note, Marilyn, it's time for the next poll.
Thank you, Alan. And while I'm bringing up that poll, I'll share some enthusiasm from an attendee, Karen. She's a big fan of yours. She says that she's a pivot table ace because of Alan. That's nice to hear. So folks, here's your second poll question. Have you ever tried to create a pivot table from multiple sheets? 4 simple choices. No, once in a while. I can use them, but I struggle. Or if you're like Karen, you might be an ace. Everybody's very enthusiastic on this topic this morning, Alan. We're already at 90%. So I'm going to count you down from 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. I'm going to close the poll and share these results.
Oh, the aces just went down from 14% to 2%. So I think I will expand your knowledge 2 weeks from now. And now, Marilyn, it's time to do a handoff to Elizabeth from TaxCycle, please.
Absolutely. So Elizabeth, I'm going to make you the presenter.
Okay, thank you, Marilyn. I think we're coming up.
I see you now. You have the comm.
Okay, excellent. I'm just going to collapse a couple things and have a chance for everyone to look. Thank you, Marilyn and Alan. Alan, I'm in the same camp as Marilyn was at the beginning of this. I tried PivotTables and didn't know what I was doing, but now I think I have a lot more confidence. So thank you so much for that introduction to me, because it's one of those things I always wish I knew more about. So it's a pleasure to be here today. Some people will have seen me present some things in the past. We join Marilyn and Alan usually every season for a little bit of a discussion about TaxCycle and import and export and Excel. So my name's Elizabeth Cole, and I'm Director of Communications and User Experience at Trilogy Software, which we make TaxCycle, the professional tax software. And we've been around now since I think 2010. We have several years of software under our belt, and this is the group of us here in Calgary. We're Canadian based, and we were created by, that's Cameron Peters in the middle of the picture there, and he was the one who started CanTax and Profile software back in the day. So if you're a tax preparer, you should be reassured that you know that our background is all about tax for tax preparers. We are very passionate about what we do, and we're very passionate about providing great service. And so we would love to invite you to join us for a free trial right now, if the season isn't too busy for you. I'm going to keep moving on a little bit. Today, we're going to look at things that relate to data for corporate tax returns. So usually I do a lot more Excel focus because that's the theme from Alan, but I wanted to do a couple of things that involved Excel and a couple of things that just talked about data. So when we're talking about tax returns and spreadsheets, usually it's about trying to move some data around. So, and seeing as this is a busier time for corporate tax returns, I thought I would show more of our corporate tax product today. So we'll start out and we'll look at importing GIFI financial statement information into a T2 file. And then we'll look about linking T2 files if you have associated and related corporations. And I'm going to show you how to pull some data out of TaxCycle's database, the client manager, and how you can get customized reports from that to use back in Excel and make pivot tables if you want to. And finally, I'm hoping to have time to just show you a couple of new features that we've been excited about, which is RC59 electronic filing. The RC59 is the authorization forms for business consent for online access to their data from the CRA. We just released this last month, and it's a brand new feature for us and for the CRA. So this saves a lot of time if you're trying to get access to your client's data, and it's really easy to do. And then if I can sneak it in, we might do some download of T2 data from CRA as well, because that's actually possible too if you hadn't heard of that before. And before I get too far along, I just wanted to let you know that this time of year is when we actually launch our prices for the upcoming season. And by upcoming season, I mean the season when you're going to be preparing the 2018 return. And the reason why I mention this at this time of year is that we offer really our best prices on that year, the coming year's software right now. There's great discounts. We offer payment plans. Even if you're doing a T1 or T2, there's excellent T2 only. There's excellent value right now. And all of it, of course, is backed up by our 100% satisfaction guarantee. So if you buy now and then later on you're still not too certain about the purchase, there's always a chance to talk to us after the fact. And of course, you're supported by free support online as well for us, online and phone, as well as you make that transition. So I invite you to take a look and take a trial, and especially if this is a slower time of year and you're considering your tax software choices, we'd love to help you out. I'm going to take and let Marilyn do another poll from us just before I continue on and start showing you things in the product.
Thanks, Elizabeth. So folks, I'm going to launch the third poll, and some of you are already using TaxCycle. We'd love to know that from you. You may be using some of the others that you see there, and some of you in the room today may not use tax software at all, and that's just fine. We just like to know who we've got. The way we describe it before you all arrive is who's who in the zoo. So we're right at 80%, and we just need a few more so that we can get accurate counts here. I'm going to count you down from 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. And I'm going to close that poll now. Are you able to see the results, Elizabeth?
I cannot while I'm screen sharing. It is
Okay.
telling me. So we'll look at those after.
Yeah, we have 10% are TaxCycle, 14% Profile, 21% Tax Prep or Cantex, just 1% DT Max, and 54% of folks today don't use any of those softwares.
Okay. Excellent. Well, this will be new for those folks and give you an idea of what's possible out there. And that's great. We're happy to have your TaxCycle people here, our fans in the room, and we're happy to see everybody else as well. So this is TaxCycle on your screen. If you downloaded it from the website today, it would look like this to do. Well, actually, it wouldn't quite look like this. We're just about to launch our 2018 T1 preview, which we launch right now. We update rates so you can do some planning and things. So when we do that in the next release over the next week, you will be able to preview and plan 2018 T1 returns. But otherwise, what you see on the screen is what you would see if you downloaded and tried a trial. We're looking at T2 returns today, so I've clicked on T2 on the welcome screen. So that I can work with those returns almost exclusively, but you'll notice that TaxCycle has all the different returns within the one window so that you don't have to open different kinds of different pieces of software. All the years and all the returns are in one place. So I'm going to open a file that I prepared ahead of time. It's a corporate tax file for a small business. And this is one that I carried forward from last year. So there's a whole bunch of information that I needed to enter. And the first thing that we usually start with is our balance sheet information, the Giphy worksheets for balance sheet and income statement that the CRA requires. And I'm going to collapse a little bit at the top here to show you a little bit more. So when you come in here, I carried forward this file, so it already suggests Giphy codes and fields that I need to complete based on what I had in the return last year. I can go in and type all this data in, but since most of us use some other format to manage our information, whether before preparing the tax return, we generally suggest doing a Giphy import. So Giphy is the General Index of Financial Information. It's been a standard that's been around for a very long time for allowing the transfer of these Giphy information into a tax return and other software or between pieces of software. TaxCycle offers Giphy import from basically any of your accounting or working paper software out there. So that means accounting for practitioners, caseware. If you do use QuickBooks Desktop or QuickBooks Online, there's slightly different process, CCH Engagement, Sage. As long as you can get that information into a CSV file with the Giphy codes in one column and the amount in the next, you can import it, even if it's not actually the GFI Giphy format. So for example, I have a little spreadsheet here, a CSV file that I think I exported at some point from QuickBooks Desktop. And it's just basically a report of that tax information. And you can see the first column, ignore the first row with the old date, but the first column, it basically has all your accounts with your Giphy associated with it, and then the amounts in the second column. Now, when you have this, TaxCycle will ignore these rows that don't have a code, and it'll ignore this at the top because it doesn't have a code as well. And these amounts will just come into the spreadsheet as you need. So I'm going to close this, sorry, into the program as you need. I'm not going to bother saving it. And really in TaxCycle, most imports are as simple as a drag and drop. So I just drag it in, it lets me know that there's information to import, and I say yes, and then it appears in those fields. So it matches those items up and then starts validating that data. If I want to re-import, I can just drag it over the top. If I didn't want to import yet, and I'm still got that window open, I can undo. Everything in TaxCycle is undo and redo and quite modern in that way. You can find this tool as well if you'd prefer not to drag and drop under the data menu. So that's an option for you as well. And as an aside, since we're talking about spreadsheets and backup documentation, if you There's another thing you can do if you drag and drop into TaxCycle, and I'm not sure we talk about this a lot, but you can actually attach any document to a field in TaxCycle by just dragging it over. So pretend this was some other kind of Excel spreadsheet. I can just drag it onto a field, and you'll see that little paperclip appears in TaxCycle on the field. This means we have linked a file that is external to a field. So if you need to put backup information that you have in your spreadsheets, you can actually create that link and mark it on the appropriate form in TaxCycle. And if you click that link that's in the message there, you can open up the file that you need. So this is really handy, and I haven't shown it very much because we just sort of know it's there, but I want to point that out to you. The linking, you can put whatever kind of file you want as long as you can open it on your computer. It will open based on the Windows settings after the fact. Okay, Marilyn, would you like to do the second poll now? I'm a little early, but I think it's worth doing that one at this moment because I'll get the next topic's a little longer.
All right, thanks, Elizabeth. So folks, there's your blue screen, and that's an easy question. If you had been looking for tax software and used tax software, when was the last time you made a change? 3 years ago, 2 years ago, last year? Maybe you don't use tax software or you've not made that switch yet. So a pretty simple question, and we're going to be getting to 90% very quickly, Elizabeth.
Okay.
I'm going to count them down from 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, folks, let's just share those results. So 41% were 3 years ago, 10% 2 years ago, 9% a year ago, and just shy of 40% have not had to make a change or looked for tax software. Thanks for that, guys. Back to you, Elizabeth.
Thanks, Marilyn. So Jane's Jumpers, her corporation here, is actually a part of a group of associated and related corporations. And one of the things that we worked hard on last year was making the relationship between those tax returns and the data flow nicely between groups of corporations so that you're preparing a return for one corporation. You can share the required information with the other as needed. So that is corporate linking. And we're going to take a quick look at it because, again, it's a data transfer. It's just a different kind of data transfer. When you're dealing with associated and related corporations in TaxCycle, it all comes down to the CGI worksheet. The CGI worksheet is the corporate group information worksheet, and every TaxCycle return that has associated related corporations will have one of these in it, and it provides the details of the relationships and other information that is shared on Schedule 9 and Schedule 23 between the different corporations. Now, if you don't use corporate linking, you have to enter those details and make sure you check back with the other return. Corporate linking takes that need out of it and does a live link between two files. So I am going to open a related file actually here. Okay, file, recent, and we will take a look at this second window. I'm going to do a little bit of juggling here to try and make it possible to see both files on screen. So bear with me because we want them to be relatively visible. And if I collapse a few things, it's a little bit brighter. So I'm going to amp it up and we may have to scroll a bit. Actually, I have a different idea. Let's do it this way. And let's see if I can get it to collapse on the bottom. Nope, it won't let me do it on this small screen. Okay, so this is what we're going to do. We're going to amp up the resolution a little bit so that you can see a bit better. So on the left, I have Jane's Jumpers. That was the file that I had open previously. And on the right, I have A&L Consulting. Jane's Jumpers years end on the left here. You notice that it ends at the end of June, whereas the other file from ALL Consulting has already ended at the end of the year end was at the end of 2017. So I'm in the process of preparing that return because the deadline's coming up, right? And I need to make sure that information is retained for when I need to prepare Jane's return. So I'm actually going to start over in this file, but this doesn't really matter. Whichever return you're starting first, you can just create the corporate linking file. So we suggest here in this banner for creating a file, and you can just click on the link that says create a new corporate linking file. And this is a separate TaxCycle file that gets saved in the same location as your tax return. And then we give it a name automatically, and you just save it in that return. And because I was playing around with this earlier, there's an existing file there, so I'm going to overwrite that. So as soon as I do that, it tells me that A&L Consulting here on the right is the source information for corporate linking right now. And on the left, I have to tell Jane's Jumpers to go and look for that corporate linking file. And you just have to set this up once. And so basically I open and it looks in that same folder. And then it tells me that this is the target information for corporate linking. So now these two files are looking at, this file is looking at the data in both returns and moving it back and forth. My favorite place to show the example on this is the allocation of the business limit, because this is one of those ones that you can make a decision and move it between the two very quickly. So this is further down here. I might drop this font size just a little bit more to see if we can get more on the screen. Just a little bit more too. The small business deduction. We're looking at that schedule 23 here, right? So on the first row, I have Jane's Jumpers. On the second row, it's A&L Consulting. And you'll notice on the right-hand side, those reverse based on which file you're in. So if I go into A&L Consulting, because I'm preparing their return first, and I decide to allocate, 60% of that business, or let's say 30% of that business limit to Jane's Jumpers, before I hit return here, I want you to see, and it scrolled on me there a little bit, it actually updated and managed that on the left here. So let's see if we can get a little bit more visibility on that. The way it works in TaxCycle, you can allocate from a dollar amount if you want, and then it will calculate the percentage, or you can allocate from the percentage and it will calculate the applicable dollar amount. But as soon as I change those amounts, they move back and forth. So this is just the very basics of corporate linking, but we have additional information online to show you how it works. So I wanted to make sure to point that out today. And I'm going to do one more thing before I come back to RC59. I'm actually going to close these returns and save it. And this is our workflow screen. So I'm going to do something here and say, oh, look, I'm waiting for client on this one. And then we're going to be able to see this information in the next example I give you. So I'm going to save that. And the other thing I'm going to do on return completion, let's set a due date under here. So this one needs to be done at the end of this month, I believe. So let's do the 29th since it's a Friday. And I'm going to click save. And then that information will appear in our client manager. I'm going to close this one too. Save and exit. That one's already waiting for client. Just make sure I have everything I need. So the client manager in TaxCycle lives on a different screen. You can either get to it by clicking client manager on the left here. You can get to it just by searching at the top here, or you can get to it using the quick search bars on the right. So for example, if I click on this, I can actually get a full list of my returns, and it will at the same time open the client manager. The client manager is a database that runs either on your machine or on your server, and it looks at all the TaxCycle file and brings all that information together so that you can search and find the files you need and get some status from year over year and get details on your clients. There's a lot of things you can do with the client manager, but we're going to focus today on just generating a report that gives you some status on your T2 returns. So of course, on a bigger screen, this is a little easier to manage just because of the volume of data, but there are some tricks. I'm going to unpin this sidebar so that it only appears when I hover over it. So way at the bottom here, there's this little pin, which allows me to have it hover and unhover like that. Hover and get the detail back, and it won't squish up the columns quite so much. All right, so if I'm doing T2 returns, right now I have a full list of T2 returns, full list of all the returns in here. You can see some T1 returns, you see different years, you see all kinds of things. I want to narrow this list. So first off, I want to do a return type of just T2 CO17. And you'll see in TaxCycle, all of this is live. Like when you start to do filters, it happens right away. I clicked that button, the list of returns changed. even the way it display changed because things that are available in T2 are different than things that are available in others. And we'll show you how to take control of that here shortly. And you'll see that the filter is selected at the top here by the search field. So I'm going to do T2 returns. I'm actually going to focus on 2018 T2 returns if I wanted to, or I can narrow this in a different way. So this is focused on the ones that are from the 2018, have a 2018 year end. You can see the year end column. But maybe I want to handle that slightly differently. So what I want to know, I'm going to turn this off again, and we're going to scroll all the way down to an area that people might not have noticed yet, the dates section. And in the dates section, I can search for all kinds of things related to dates. So depending on the type of return. So the due date's an obvious one, that one that we set before. I can choose year end, which is what I'm going to do here. So if I'm going to say if it's after, let's say it's after December 30th, because that catches all my year ends, I get a nice list of those returns that are 2018 and forward and may need to be prepared right now, or at least I can plan for that will be need to be prepared soon. One that's kind of fun if you're doing T1 returns, and I won't cover today, you can actually do some searches based on the age of the taxpayer. So this can help you identify clients who you have to have specific conversations with this year because there's a certain time of life where things are changing, or kids are growing up, or you might be starting to take a pension. So take a look at the date filter if you haven't before. So when I'm in this date filter now, I've got all this information, and this might not be exactly how I want to export it to Excel. So I can do a lot of configuration on that. So this is basically a table format. And in the top right here, there's this little table with an arrow in it. And when we have something called column layouts, and these are kind of styles for your table. So styles in that it decides what columns appear in there and in which order. We have a standard column layout, which gives you a pretty overview. TaxCycle comes with a bunch of column layouts that are specific to the return. So for example, here there's the T2CO17 column layout, and that has some details in it. I'm going to show you that you can change how these appear as well. So if I go under here and I go into options, it'll take me right into options where I can edit this column layout. And I'm just going to restore the default because I had played with it earlier today. So if I click on the T2CO17 layout, I can adjust what columns I see. And it's as simple as dragging it from this available columns over to the selected columns section. So I like a little bit different than our default sometimes. So since we set some target dates, if I scroll down, I can actually have a column about target dates, so I can get some due date information. I would also like to, one of my favorites is like you have the file name here, but sometimes if you're in a larger office, it can be useful to know where the file is, not just what it's called. So I like to change the file name to file path. And that'll give me a little more information in case I'm looking for the file. I want to know which files I'm waiting on the client. So if it's a waiting column, let's put that right at the top because that is important. And in my office, we use client IDs, not so much the reference number or business number as well. We use both of them basically so we can reference our own systems. So I'm going to put the client ID. And I can, as soon as I hit apply, it will save this column layout. And then I will go back in here and you'll see a few different things. So now I have this waiting column. I have my target date column. I have a client ID. For those that I've put them in, test data is always a little less reliable. So you can give a sense. I could remove all these filing columns if I want. There's so many different filing services now that with time, it may be a bit much for everybody to do. And here on the other side is my full path column as well. As I said, I'm working on a fairly small screen at this point, so it's a little tighter than it would normally be, but that's one of the advantages of this column layout. You can actually reduce the number of columns you see, and you can make custom layouts too. So if I really like T2 layout, let's just do this really quickly, and I want to duplicate it, and I'm going to call this my T2 small, I'm then going to remove everything with filing, and I might just drag them all over there, and I'm going to have a much bit more and easier time seeing what's going on. So I'm going to do T2 small, and then I can get a little bit better picture of where everything is for my status. So you're saying, well, this is great, but we want to use this somewhere else, or I have a meeting and I want to report on it, and I want to pull it into Excel. So actually, before I do that, I spent all this time designing a column layout and a report. It would be a shame if I had to do it every single time. So in my case here, I'm going to save this as a quick search, and that will save my column layout and my filters all in one place. So this is my T2 status report. Let's do that, and I click save. I clicked on the save as a new search, then I enter the name and I just click the little save button. And now when I come back in the next time, I can quickly just select that report. I don't have to go through all the configuration I did before. And then finally, if I want to pull this out to Excel, we have a few different options. If I want exactly this layout in Excel, I can just say export to an Excel workbook. Let's just save it, and it's going to pull it in, and then you can start doing all the great things you learned from Alan in that Excel workbook. And then there's a few other export options as well. So ones that just show return status or contact information and details. But this is how you can customize what you see on a screen and get it straight out to Excel. Okay, I'm gonna let Marilyn do another poll, and then maybe I'll really quickly show you something we're excited about with RC59, if I'm allowed to still, Marilyn.
Absolutely, Elizabeth. I love your enthusiasm. So let's quickly get this poll going. Last poll for our session, folks. What's the one thing, if you were thinking of switching to another software product, could you maybe narrow down the one thing that sticks in your mind that's preventing you from switching? Sometimes switching is hard, so let's be open and honest with our feelings, shall we? Sometimes it's price, sometimes it's support, sometimes it just feels too hard to learn new software. Maybe you've had a look and there's just some features that aren't there. Or maybe you're just completely happy with what you've got, and that's fine too. Poll's coming along great. I'm going to count you down, folks, from 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Thanks everyone for your responses. I'm going to close the poll now. Okay, here we go, Elizabeth.
Okay, let's see how quick I can do this and still make it comprehensible.
Absolutely.
All right. Thanks. We're pretty excited to do this RC59 in our last major T2 update, because one of the complications we heard. Hi. Okay, I'm back again. We were fairly excited to do this release, actually quite excited, because one of the things we were hearing from preparers was that they love the process of the T1013 authorization filing and T2 and AFR, autofill my return, that's available from the CRA to allow you to get authorization to access information and download it. And that was for T1 clients, so personal tax returns. And then so we were excited about this because now the CRA is letting us do this for business returns. So right now this is in corporate income tax returns in TaxCycle. We are hoping to see it for sole proprietorships in T1. That all depends on how the CRA allows us to certify for that in the fall, but we are hopeful that you'll be able to do a similar process in T1 for next season if you're doing business returns, even on personal tax side. So in T2, very similarly to TaxCycle's T1013 on the T1, it's a transmission type in the transmission sidebar. And the first thing you do is you choose what kind of consent you want. And this opens a worksheet called the RC59 Online Consent Worksheet. Now, this is a completely new worksheet that we've designed based on the requirements from the CRA. It is not a form that you can print and send into the CRA and expect to get consent to access items online. It's very important, as you can see that said at the top of the message. But this is where you choose what kind of authorization you want. There's a couple of other options in here, like no online access. If all you're wanting is phone and paper access, there still exists the RC59X, and if you select this, it will, not the RC59X, it'll, the regular RC59, it will require you to print that. And then But for today, we're just going to do the online access by an individual, and I'm going to show you how quick it is, and then we'll end off because I'm sure everybody wants to go and have their lunch. So I select that option, and then I go in here and I can choose the program accounts that I want. So all program accounts, or I can be specific about whether I want payroll or something like that. And then on the bottom here, I have to select my authorization level. So there's actually 3 in here now. You will need online access, so probably 1 or 2 at the very least to do T2 AFR. So we're going to choose 2, and then I actually have to have some first and last name information, which I forgot to enter in this file. This is and then we'll be able to do a transmission. I just want to show you really quick how this can help you. You have a client sitting there. You're going to come in. You're going to complete this to get authorization for a new client. You can print it on PDF or your printer. I'm going to send it to PDF real quick just to show you. You print this out. You get them to sign it. And then you confirm the signature. And then we just say transmit now. And then it goes through and comes back with a confirmation. And now you should have access to their information online in Represent a Client. So it's a really quick way to get access to a client's business account and eventually do an autofill download as well. Although I'm not going to end up showing that today. I think we have a web video on our website to help you out with that. So thank you very much for having me today, Marilyn and Alan. I really appreciate being able to take the time to talk about what we're passionate about with TaxCycle and show you a few new tricks if you're already a preparer or you're already a TaxCycle user. And I will turn things back over to Marilyn to sign things off.
Thanks, Elizabeth. I'm going to move swiftly over to passing things to Alan so that he can get us wrapped up. I have lots of questions, folks, just letting you know that I'm recording them for Elizabeth to be able to answer, and you'll see those within 10 days.
So thank you, Elizabeth and Marilyn. That was very, very interesting. Before I close today, I want to touch on 2 topics. One, I will be taking you further into PivotTables in 2 weeks. And some of you know that I have a passion for research. Now, the research I'm doing right now involves what are called managed services, which is outsourcing your IT requirements. So we're considering doing a mini webinar. It'll be 45 minutes long in July to explain the benefits of that. When you complete the survey that we ask you to do at the end of this webinar, there is a question there about whether you would be interested in attending a roundtable on managed services. And on that, thank you all. It's a wrap.